Hey everyone, it's great to be talking to you again. I know last week y'all had a lecture video from Dr. Molly Anderson covering chapter 7. I hope it was really informative for you all and you really enjoyed that content. I am back to you with chapter 8, which is going to be our memory chapter. So last week was learning, this week is memory. Before we jump into our lecture, there's a few just updates, some class things that I wanted to share with y'all. I'm about to share my screen. Okay, and so this is our, as you know, our class course on Canvas. We are now in week 4, so hopefully y'all have had a good start to our school year. I think we're right at the month mark. I just wanted to show you some of the things that are available for chapter 8. You're going to have a handout and an outline for this chapter. You are also, and this is specific to chapter 8 because there are a lot of terms in this chapter you're going to need to know. I created a term document for you. So it's just terms to know once this loads. And so it's going to have all of the terms that are sort of bolded in our PowerPoint and our lecture, and it's going to have the definition attached to them. Let me try to download this and see if it'll be quicker. I'll reshare my screen. Oh yeah, that was quicker. Okay, so sorry I misspoke. It doesn't have the definitions on this document, but it does have all of the words that you're going to need to remember, especially for your test. So definitely use this and sort of match this up with the outline and the handout to pull those definitions because this is going to be helpful for your exam. I'm going to stop sharing that. Show you a few more things. Where is my, there we go. So those are those terms to know. We're going to go back to the modules. Chapter 8. So those are right here. We have again our discussion board participation that you need to make sure you post your initial response on Wednesday and then your follow-up response on Friday. We have some additional videos for you to watch that will help really learn some of this course content or this chapter content. So there's the memory crash course and the Elizabeth Loftus TED Talk talking about false memories and some issues with eyewitness testimony. We also have our learning curves where you have chapter 8 learning curve A through C along with chapter 8 quiz. And then there's a little extra assignment in learning curve, assess your strengths. How might you improve your memory? We also have a assignment coming up. The materials for that assignment are also going to be posted today. And that is the Consumer of Psychological Science assignment. There's a separate video that you're going to watch for that, going through the assignment document, the article that you're going to be reading and answering questions about, and then some assistance with APA citations, link right here. I did go ahead and make a change to our course calendar. This originally was going to be due on Friday, which is the 16th. However, I thought you might like the weekend to work on this. I know this is probably the first time that a lot of y'all are going to be reading a journal article, especially a scientific journal article. And so you might need just a little more time to read through it and answer the questions. So instead of it being due on Friday, I made it due Monday. So it's going to be due September 19th, not September 16th. And I'll try to remember to go into our course calendar and adjust that due date as well. But you're going to find the information for the Consumer Psychological Science assignment right here once I publish it on Sunday tonight. Let's see. Additionally, I'm going to post an announcement. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. I'm going to post an announcement this week of some office hours that I'm going to have, some virtual office hours that are going to be sort of scattered throughout the week and potentially one day on the weekend. Because I haven't gotten a lot of emails and I haven't got a lot of questions. And with this assignment coming up, I feel like y'all might have some questions. So I'm going to post some office hours with the dates, the times, and the Zoom link that you can just pop into if you have any questions or you just want to say hi. And I think I'm going to have 1 or 2 hours this weekend also, this upcoming weekend, which is going to be the 17th and the 18th, for you to ask questions then in case you can't do it during the week. And so you'll be fully prepared to submit your assignment on the 19th. Those are all of our class updates. So let's go ahead and jump into our lecture this week, which is going to be Chapter 8, Memory. I'm going to share my screen, start presenting. Okay, so in this chapter, we're going to be going over studying and encoding memories. We're going to also talk about storage and retrieving or retrieval of memories. We're also going to talk about forgetting, memory construction, and how to improve our memory. So what is memory and how is it measured? So memory is persistence of learning over time through encoding, storage, and retrieval of information. And we're going to talk about those 3 processes as we talk through some of the models of memory. And then evidence of memory is being able to recall information, or an example being, I know that yesterday was September 10th, right? Or I know that pi is 3.14, right? Being able to pull that information out from my memory. Recognizing information, so being able to be like, oh, I've seen this before. I know what this is, I recognize it. And then relearning is more easy or is quicker on a later attempt. And we're going to talk about why that is and what the model of memory for that is. So these are the 3 measures of memory retention. Recall, a measure of memory in which a person must retrieve information learned earlier. An example of this is a fill in the blank test. So you have a sentence and you have this one spot that's blank and you fill it in. That is an example of recall. Recognition is a measure of memory in which a person identifies items previously learned. And this is an example of this is a multiple choice test. You have one question, you have 3 answers, and you being able to recognize this one is the answer that is correct. And then relearning, which is a measure of memory that assesses the amount of time saved when we are learning a material again. An example of this is if you took, say, your senior or junior year of high school, you took a Spanish class and you genuinely studied, you did really well in the class, you learned some basic Spanish, and then you went on, you didn't take another Spanish class until like junior year of college. So in that Spanish class, in your junior year of college, you are going to learn the material a little faster, the basic material a little faster than your classmates who had never been exposed to Spanish before. Because you already have that memory, those memories encoded, and you have them in your long-term memory, you're able to pull it out and learn information a little quicker, relearn information a little quicker. Example of this is Ebbinghaus. Ebbinghaus's retention curve. Ebbinghaus found that the more times he practiced a list of nonsense syllables on day 1, the less time it required him to relearn it on day 2. And the speed of relearning is one measure of memory retention. The tests of recognition and time spent relearning demonstrate that we can recall, we remember more than we recall, right? So you'll have memories stored in your long-term memory that you have and you know, but you can't necessarily pull them out and recall them, but they're still there. And they can help you in that relearning process. So how do psychologists describe the human memory system or processes of memories? So psychologists use memory models to think and communicate about memory. So one of those models is the information processing model. And it compares human memory to computer operations. And involves three processes, which are encoding, we're bringing it in, storage, which is how we keep our memories, and then retrieval, which is how we pull them out, right? Similar to a computer, right? Encoding being like a keyboard, you're typing in your information, storage being your hard drive or your tower, and then retrieval being like your computer screen, being able to click on a file and open it back up and seeing that information. Another model is the connectionism information processing model. This focuses on multi-track parallel processing, and which is the processing of many aspects of a problem simultaneously. And it views memories as products of interconnected neural networks. So multiple things happening at once in the brain producing a memory. So this is that example of the information processing model. We have the encoding, which is typing in on the keyboard. We have the storing, which is our hard drive, our RAM, our computer tower, and then the retrieval, which would be the computer screen, being able to click into our files and open them back up. So studying and encoding memories. So there's three processing stages in the classic Atkins-Shiffrin model. We first record to be remembered information as a fleeting sensory memory, the immediate, very brief recording of sensory information. So senses, right, are sight, taste, touch, hearing, right? Different senses produce sensory memories. This is the first thing that happens in our memory process. From there, we process that information into our short-term memory. This is activated memory that holds just a few items briefly. This is where we start to encode it through rehearsal. Rehearsal being things like studying, practicing, right? You have to take in that information, store it in the short-term memory, and rehearse it before you can finally move that information into long-term memory. This is relatively permanent, minus traumatic brain injuries or a disease or disorder that causes memory loss, right? Long-term memories are generally permanent, and it's a limitless storehouse of the memory system of knowledge, skills, experiences, all used for later retrieval. So our long-term memory is really wide and vast. You can keep anything in there. Does not necessarily mean you can recall that information, but it's still there if you've learned it and encoded it previously. So this is a modified version of that three-stage model we just went through, the modified Atkins-Shiffrin model. And it also brings into account automatic processing. So researchers have found that some memories do not have to go through that sensory memory, short-term memory into long-term memory. Some memories automatically process into long-term memory storage. And this also takes into account this maintenance rehearsal process. It's why we sort of moved from short-term memory to working memory. Because of that active working process to encode or keep that information in your memories in your brain. This is a little bit a better model of how to sort of visualize this information. So we have the incoming information. This is everything coming from our senses, what you hear, what you see, what you taste, smell, touch. And then we have a thing called selective attention. Selective attention is really interesting because it only focuses on what we deem as important. And if we don't deem it important, it's going to be forgotten, right? So if sensory memory happens, it's not important. We don't need to pay attention to it. It drops off. When we decide to pay attention and selective attention to it, it then goes into our short-term memory. From here, this is where we must rehearse information, right? If we don't rehearse it, we don't encode it, it gets dropped and it's forgotten. This is why it's really important to study or review your notes or practice your skills or sports. If you're not doing that rehearsal, it's going to get dropped. So you do that rehearsal, go through that process, and then eventually it's successfully coded for storage and long-term memory, and it stays there. Again, you might not always be able to recall it, but it's going to stay in your long-term memory. So working memory, right? Previously called short-term memory, now called working memory. Working memory stresses the active processing occurring in the second memory stage. Working memory is a newer understanding of short-term memory. It adds our consciousness, active processing of incoming auditory and visual spatial information, and information retrieved from long-term memory. So the previous model, right, when we were just talking about we'll go here. When we were just talking about short-term memory, right, it did not take into account information that we already knew, right? We don't just take in new information and not make connections to things we already know. So working memory pulls in our consciousness about the information we're bringing in. It pulls in that active processing of sort of thinking through the sensory information that is coming at us, which is the auditory and the spatial visual. And then it takes into account things we already know that we're pulling in to inform how we remember or how we understand this new information. So in Baddeley's model, this focus processing is handled by what is called a central executive. So Baddeley's model of working memory, simplified here, includes visual and auditory rehearsal of new information. So that's that repeating information. It's right here, right? Repeating someone's name when you're trying to meeting a new person, trying to remember their name. Visual spatial information, picturing their face. Then you have this central executive, this manager who's taking that focused attention and pulling information from what we already know, right? That long-term memory. Maybe we have a fact about that person that we already know. So we're meeting Lisa for the first time in person, right? Lisa, we're repeatedly mentally saying that person's name, Lisa, Lisa, Lisa. We're visualizing that person's face. And we know that Lisa likes sharks. Just some random long-term memory we already know about Lisa. And this is going to help us encode the information of Lisa's name, right? Pulling that into long-term memory. So how do explicit and implicit memories differ? Explicit memories are called declarative memories, memories of facts and experiences that one can consciously know and declare. We encode explicit memories through conscious, effortful processing. So effortful processing would be things like studying, rehearsing, practicing. So I know that the water molecule is H2O, right? That's because I've studied in my biology class what the water molecule is. I used effortful processing to learn that information, and now it's encoded in my long-term memory. It's a statement I can declare. An implicit memory is a non-declarative memory. It's implicit memory retention of learned skills or classically conditioned associations independent of conscious recollection. So we encode implicit memories through automatic processes or processing without our awareness. So these are things that we do not think about anymore. They just automatically happen. So implicit memories include procedural memory for automatic skills and classically conditioned associations among stimuli. So some information that's automatically processed is space, which is the physical space around you, time, and frequency. Automatic processing happens effortlessly. Again, we don't think about it. It's like the automatic nervous system is something you don't have to think about, like breathing. With experience and practice, learn skills like reading or driving become automatic and take no effort to do. So many skills are developed this way. If you have a job that's very procedural, right, you are putting together a toy. After so many repetitions of doing that skill, right, putting together that toy becomes automatic. You don't have to think about how you are doing it. You just do it. So how does sensory memories work? We've talked about sensory memories a couple times so far. Sensory memory feeds our active working memory, right? We're taking that information, that sensory information, as we're learning something new, and records momentary images of scenes and echoes of sound. So there's two types of sensory memories: there's iconic memory and echoic memory. So iconic, right? Icon, think of visual. Echoic, echo, think of auditory, right? Hearing. So iconic memory, picture an image, it's picture image memory of visual stimuli lasting no more than a few tenths of a second, right? It's a picture that sort of flashes in your mind. An echoic memory is sound memory of auditory stimuli. So it's hearing, and it can be recalled within 3 or 4 seconds. When George Sperling flashed a group of letters similar to the one to this for 1/20th of a second, people could recall only about half the letters. But when signaled to recall any one row immediately after the letters had disappeared, they could do so with near perfect accuracy. That's because they had an iconic memory of the image, right? They were able to remember from that flash of an image a row, right? It could flash in their mind and they could recall what was on the screen. So what is short-term memory capacity? Short-term memory only holds a few items briefly, such as the 7 digits of a phone number while dialing, before the information is either stored or it's forgotten. Remember, you have that short-term or those working memories, and if you don't rehearse them, they're dropped. And if you do rehearse them, they are encoded into long-term memory. That working memory, that short-term memory, can only hold a few things. So George Miller proposed the magic number 7. People can store about 7 bits of information, give or take 2. Badley and colleagues confirmed that without distractions, we can recall about 7 digits, about 6 letters, and about 5 words. And this capacity for memory and in short-term memory will depend on your age and the amount of distractions that are happening at the time. So it's why it's really important when you're studying or rehearsing information to not have a lot of distractions around, because it can impact the amount of information you can remember and store. So what are some strategies? What are some effortful processing strategies that can help us remember new information? A few examples are chunking, right? This is organization of items into familiar, manageable units. This often occurs automatically. Mnemonics, right? Memory aids, especially techniques that use vivid imagery and organizational devices. The PEG word system harnesses our superior visual imagery, right? We're very visual creatures. It is helpful to have a visual idea, a visual of what you're trying to think of, a picture in your head. And then hierarchies, organization of items into a few broad categories that are divided and subdivided into narrower concepts and facts. This is a really great note-taking method. So if you are taking notes for, say, this chapter, if you go back to our overview slide, we're going over encoding, we're going over implicit, explicit memories, we're going over effortful processing versus automatic processing. You can make those sort of headers in your outline for studying. And underneath each of those headers, you can put concepts that are associated with it. Concepts for encoding memories, concepts for sensory memories, right? And then underneath that, you can put definitions or important people or important models. That is a way you can structure your notes to really help you in that effortful processing of encoding those short-term memories into long-term memories. So chunking is the process of grouping bits of information into larger units based on meaningfulness of the bits. Short-term memory capacity is then 7 plus or minus 2 chunks. So you can remember more information, right? You might be able to remember more phone numbers, right? 7-digit number. If there's no meaning behind it, you're not chunking it with anything else, you might only remember that one 7-digit number. But if you were grouping, say, all of your family's phone numbers, you might be able to remember 7 plus or minus 2 individual people's phone numbers because you group them into your family's phone numbers, or you chunk them into your family's phone numbers. We're going to skip that bit. Rehearsal. So rehearsal, we've talked about this, I like to connect it back to studying. This can also be like practice. You have two different kinds. You have maintenance rehearsal and elaborative rehearsal. Maintenance rehearsal is repeating information silently to prolong its presence in your short-term memory. This is like rote learning, but this is not effective for long-term learning. That doesn't mean you should not do it. It is important to do things like review your notes or read the chapter. Doing that will keep that information in your short-term memory for longer. But to encode it, right, to make it a long-term memory, you need to do elaborative rehearsal. Elaborative rehearsal links new information with things you already know, existing memories and knowledge in your long-term memory. And this is a good way to transfer those short-term memories directly into the long-term memories because it kind of creates a web of connections. So connecting it with what you already know from either other courses, other chapters, other life experiences, right? That elaborative rehearsal. Coming up with your own examples is a really helpful version of this as you're going through concepts in the past 3 chapters that we've done, chapter 1, 8, and 7, going over those main topics and concepts and creating your own examples can be really helpful to make them long-term memories. There's a few other strategies for helping you encode memories. One of them is the spacing effect. Encoding, or making short-term memories long-term memories, is more effective when it's spread out over time. So distributed practice produces better long-term retention than is achieved through mass study or mass practice. Mass practice, in contrast, produces speedy short-term learning, and you feel really confident in what you learned, but you're going to forget that information quickly. So this is like cramming versus studying a little bit throughout the week. Studying a little bit throughout the week is going to really help you genuinely remember the information. Whereas if you cram, it might help you take the test at 8 a.m., right? If you crammed the night before, but you're going to forget all that information later, which is really unhelpful when you have things like cumulative exams where everything you've learned over the course of this semester is on one test. But if you only crammed for your tests, everything that you learned at the beginning of the semester, you're going to have to relearn again because it did not become long-term memory. We also have the testing effect. This is enhanced memory after retrieving rather than simply rereading information. So repeated self-testing does more than assess learning, right? It improves it. This is why we use the learning curves. That learning curves take into account the testing effect. And so it's testing you to help you learn the information. Okay, so what are levels of processing and how do they affect encoding? We're actually going to stop here. This is going to be where we're going to pick up in chapter 8, lecture part 2. We have about 30 more slides in this lecture. We're going to stop there. Again, if you're following along, we are stopping at 8.8, which is levels of processing and encoding.